Alright, so welcome back everyone. We are now going to have the last conference of the day. It's going to be a conference by Aurélien Joucla, who is also a former student of our school and is now working as a localization producer for Apple in the Silicon Valley. So it's quite a great guest to have today. And he's going to talk with us about location engineering and how he accessed his current position. So please give a warm welcome to Aurélien Joucla.
All right, let me see. Can you see my presentation as a, no, it looks like you see my keynote instead of the actual keynote itself. Oh, great. Let's see if I hit play in window, probably it's going to be better. And then if we share this window, let's see. Screen, just a second. Because you're seeing the keynote window instead of the keynote itself, which typically is fine, but I guess this one should be working better. Let's see. There you go. It's magic technology. All right. Thank you for having me today. Happy to be here. So as it was said, I am a former student of IUT de Vannes. Although I did not do IT, I was in GEA. Back then, that was 2005, so a long time ago. And I currently live in San Francisco and work in localization in Silicon Valley. So I am not a software engineer myself, but as a project manager, I do work with engineers on a daily basis. And today we'll walk through my background and how it led me to my current position, and then go into what software localization means. And we'll go into high-level concepts on how you could manage it as future engineers. All right, what does localization mean? First of all, it's not to be confused with geolocalization. The definition of localization from the Oxford Dictionary is the process of making something local in character or restricting it to a particular place. In other words, it's translation with more contextualized considerations, such as cultural or even legal adaptation. So before exploring localization in the context of software, we'll go through my background and how it led me to this specialization. So, as I said, I am from Vannes. Most of my schooling happened on the very street that you are on, Rue Montaigne. I went to most of the schools on Rue Montaigne and then Lycée de Sage, not far. So from the age 4 all the way to 20. And then I completed my DUT from IUT de Vannes in 2005. I did GEA, which is pretty much business administration. And there, as you probably know, we study mostly management, human resources, social psychology, marketing, and basic database concepts. Of course, nothing compared to what you do in IT, but just high-level concepts of what databases are. And then I went to Université Haute-Bretagne in 2007, and I graduated from there doing LOA, which is pretty much foreign languages and marketing. So I did a lot of advanced translation and marketing work. And then besides academics, I have a creative background at the same time that I could tie to my career. So I am a pretty active musician. I'm a drummer. And because of that, I learned by myself how to do music production, the basics of the business, touring. So that kind of forces you to get creative, to do things by yourself, get super DIY, be a little crafty, which are skills that you can definitely repurpose in many different situations. Then I went to become a project manager for record labels, so releasing albums internationally. And as you'll see, that was a very important step that led me to my current position because you have to release something in different markets. So you have to consider a lot of adaptation for that. And something kind of similar that I did as my last job in France was to move towards sales and be a field account manager for a music distributor. So I was basically selling music to stores around the country, to record stores. So it really taught me how to adapt to customer needs and then change the sales pitch based on the specialty and the locales. For instance, although I had the same catalog, obviously for the entire country, if you had to go to that new hipster record store in Paris, you don't approach it exactly the same as a Centre Culturel Leclerc in the suburbs somewhere else in France. So you have to adapt. And then in 2017, I moved to the San Francisco Bay Area, where I am today. Back then, of course, I was skeptical that I could leverage my experience as a sales representative selling music to record stores in France and have this tied to my background in languages. But it turns out I was wrong. And I discovered localization back then. And I started first as a vendor in Silicon Valley. So I did a lot of in-context translation and creative editorial write for a famous music app that a lot of you might be using. And then they meant that I could leverage my background in translation, marketing, and project management, but also the field sales, interacting with different record stores across the country. I knew how to talk to, let's say, experts in classical music or kinds of rap, etc. So I knew how to adapt based on those differences, and I could completely repurpose that here. In doing that, I gained skills and got hired for project management for a big tech company here that has a very fruitful technology, which you know the name of. And the moral of the story here is that every job offers something to learn and repurpose. There's always something you can learn and always something you can repurpose to a different position later. Now, let's move to the fun stuff, software localization engineering. So we'll go into what it implies and how you, as future engineers, you could approach it. All right, so let's say you go to your favorite crêperie in Vannes, and then towards the end, the owner comes to you and say, "Hey, I heard that you were a student at IUT de Vannes. I have this amazing idea. I want to start selling caramel pancakes around the world, and I want to build an app for that. And could you build this app for me? And we're going to have to have it ready for, I don't know, like 100 countries, 35 languages. Can you do it?" So first you probably finish your dessert and try to think about it. That, okay, can I do it? And this is the kind of questions that you should be asking yourself in this situation. So let's say you need to localize software. So let's say it's this app. How would you approach it? How do you commit to a plan and know that it's going to be scalable? Like today, it's an app that's just for one country. And then later, it's going to be for, as I said, 100 countries, 35 languages. How do you come up with a plan today that will not have to change once you start scaling? Well, first step is look at the source. Let's say the app has a mockup already, and of course you could assume it would be French. And then you discuss with the owner the elements of the app. Look at every section and try to understand what they're doing with that. For instance, some of the questions you could ask is, hey, do you need this part to be accessible offline all the time? Do you expect frequent updates on this copy? Does the same copy need to be repurposed in different placements on the app? Does it need to be super dynamic and customized based on the context? And then once you kind of figure this out, you'll find that each use case is better addressed with a very different approach. So assets can be managed in very different ways. And as you know, in engineering, you can have assets directly on the client. So when you host something on the client, it's something, as you know, that comes when you download the app. It comes once, and you don't have to fetch it from the server anymore. It's there. So it's at the initial download, it's going to be very static. And the advantages of that is it's going to work offline, right? You just download it once, and then you do not need the internet anymore to fetch the copy. It's especially important if your app, of course, is going to be on a phone, which relies on battery and network, because it means it doesn't have to keep fetching data from a server, so it's going to use less network and less battery. So you're going to save some battery life and save data. And if your employer also makes phones, it's obviously very important. But that's some advantages. But the disadvantages of that approach is it's pretty hard to update that copy or art. It could be design, it doesn't have to be text, it could be images. It's hard to update because typically that depends on agile workflows. So release sprints where you have to commit to making a new build, and you have a development phase, and then you have to release it. It takes a while. And then you depend on customers actually installing the updates. You could maybe force it on the app, but it's not a great experience either. So it's not dynamic. So assets on the client are best suited for very short evergreen generic copy. So in our example today, let's say you have this amazing app to buy pancakes. That's something you could use, for instance, for the main navigation buttons like home, back, next, or contact. Something that is super static that's not going to change. And then a more frequent approach is when, of course, you start hosting assets, so copy or art, on a server. And then you have different ways of approaching server-side assets. You could make them key-based. So the values for the key in your database are going to host extensible enumerations. So it's the same key, you just could keep adding new enumerations. So that's easy to manage. The advantages of that is your client is going to request the key to the server, and then the server is going to deliver the data in the response. Of course, you could update the data on the server as often as you want. So with our example today, let's say you're a client and you go to the server and said, hey, what's up, server? Give me French for the key. The key name is caramel pancakes dot title 3. That's my key. Could you please give me French for that? And then server goes back to client and says, yep, for that key, the French is les crêpes au salidou. And the advantages of that is the localization rules can be defined server-side, and in the translation management system that you have server-side, you can set up custom rules there. And then also another advantage is you can repurpose the same key on different placements on the app. So let's say you need les crêpes au salidou in many different placements. Let's say, for instance, on your main page, it's going to be a link that takes you to a different page, and then you land on the page, it's going to become a title of that page. Technically, you need the same copy twice, and it's not great to have people have to copy paste in different locations. So you could have one key that you just put in two different locations. So that's great. But the disadvantages of that are that it's not super easy to tailor it for a specific context because when you create a key, it's kind of a string that exists by itself. You're not necessarily going to understand exactly where it's going to live on the client. So it's not the easiest to track, and you cannot tailor it for specific context that easily. So that remains the main scenario for localization to have this approach. So it's best suited for evergreen copy that needs to be repurposed on many placements. So for instance, as I said, like les crêpes au salidou sounds like it's something you could use this approach with. If you had something also like, all right, caramel pancakes recipes, same thing, pretty generic. It's not going to change that often. You're fine. All right, and then another approach to server-side assets is to do it more programming based. So this this is more specific to every single app and how you're going to build the elements within the app. But pretty much it means pre-entry text on the placement. So you could define that this placement on the app has this ID 12345 6, and then on this ID in this placement, I'm going to start importing data, and that data is going to have locale codes as attributes, which we're going to get into in another slide. So you just say, okay, for that placement, those are all the strings that I want available, and I'm going to put a bunch of attributes with those strings, such as locales, and then you can do other attributes like the timings that show this copy from this date to this date, restrict this copy to this specific country. So those are the advantages. You can tailor it for a specific context. You can do continuous workflows. So that's for the people who are going to deliver the data to you. They know exactly where it's going to go, and data can be imported independently. So if you want to build continuous workflows for that placement, it's much easier because everybody understands where it needs to go. And as I said, you can define the custom rules for the placement. You could say in this placement, let's gate it to France only and not Belgium, for instance. Let's make it show again starting tomorrow and then end it next week. The disadvantages of that approach is that typically it means heavy maintenance and it's more difficult to repurpose, right? Because you want it for a specific context. And most of the time you need a mid layer to negotiate between the server and client. So what happens is typically your placement is going to have, let's say, French, English, Spanish, right, for that placement. And then if you don't have the mid layer, server is going to go, client is going to go to server and say, hey, I am a client, I'm a phone set up to French, give me French. Server is just going to say, hey, I just have an ID for this placement and I have a bunch of languages. I'm not sure what you're asking. So there needs to be a negotiation as a mid layer in between that says, all right, if client requests French, I'm going to find the French in that placement and deliver French to client. So there's extra work there. And that's something that is best suited for highly dynamic copy. So for instance, if you want to do a promotion and something that says, come to IUT de Vannes tomorrow at 6 p.m. Central European time for an awesome caramel pancake party that is super specific, one-time use, and maybe you want to have a bunch of promotions that happened in this placement, that's how you could approach it. Server-side, but programming-based. Now, some tips and tricks that will save you a lot of time. Of course, it is easier for people to work with you to have a reference language to scale internationally so that people know where to start from. So in your case, of course, it would be French. And then as you start scaling, because the pancakes are so good that everybody wants to buy them worldwide, probably you're going to have to integrate your app with third parties. I don't know, maybe you're going to have some distributors that want to show elements of your app. For any type of integration like this, it's better to have started with ISO standards. So for instance, there's ISO 6391, such a nice name, which establishes that we have two-letter codes for languages. So for instance, French is FR, Spanish is ES, and Portuguese is PT. And then there's another standard that is ISO 31662, sounds a bit like a droid name. It's two-letter codes for countries. So for instance, CA means Canada, FR means France, BR means Brazil, PT Portugal, ES Spain, and MX Mexico. And then you can start combining both to create specific locales so that you could say, all right, ES by itself is Spanish, but guess what? We have different kinds of Spanish around the world. So ES is going to be Spanish for Spain. ES-MX is going to be Spanish for Mexico. FRCA French for Canada, FR French for France, PTPT Portuguese for Portugal, PTBR Portuguese for Brazil. And trust me, you want to start using this combination as soon as you can, because often people start with just FR, right? And then one day said, that's great, you can do French, but how do we approach going into Quebec? Your French from France is not going to work in Quebec. I want something different. You want to make sure that your library accounted for that already. And it's going to help you integrate with third parties because everybody uses the same standards. Another one to think about is waterfalls. So account for fallback scenarios when assets are missing server side. So let's say client requests an asset, but the server cannot deliver. A server is going to deliver a fallback asset. For instance, if you don't have French available for some reason in one location, you could define the rule that say, okay, if French is missing, deliver English. That's an example. And again, very important so that you do not have holes in your app. You want to show something instead of having something completely empty. Geo-gating, I talked about this a little bit already. Maybe you have French that is meant for Belgium only and French that is meant for France. Maybe you have Spanish meant for Spain and Spanish meant for Latin America. It's a little different compared to the standards that I expressed before. What I expressed before was more about the language itself. But then for that language, you could say, for instance, that you want ES-MX as a fallback to ES-ES in Spain if you don't have ES-ES, right? You're still going to show Spanish. It's not going to be maybe the most natural sounding Spanish, but at least you have something. But you should also be able to define rules where, in some cases, you do not want Spanish from Mexico to show if Spanish for Spain is missing. An example are currencies, right? Let's say you have a price point and you say, this awesome caramel pancake is, I don't know, 4.99 pesos. Well, if you have something like that, you want to gate it to Mexico. You don't want to start showing pesos in Spain. So integrate that into your library. When you create your attributes, think of a locale with basically a full definition that has 4 letters, and then geogating. Server tokens. To kind of have a hybrid method, if some of the copy is evergreen and some of it has to change. So if only a small segment of the copy needs a very customized role. So let's say you want to do a joke on your app and you say, in English, the best day of the week to have salted caramel crepe is, and then you put the token today. Your translators, when they're going to put French, they're not going to translate the token. So they're going to do le meilleur jour de la semaine pour manger des crêpes au salidou est le, and then token today. And then that token gets its own key with a customized logic that you can set to, for instance, check the date based on the user's OS settings. So for instance, if it checks your OS today, it's going to say, all right, my user is located in France, and in this time zone right now, it is Thursday. And then you can deliver the result to clients that the best day of the week you have salted caramel crepe is Thursday, right? And then if you check the same thing tomorrow, it's going to repeat the same operation, check your date, and then it's going to change your Thursday from, to Friday. And then for each token, you can have their own translations. So you can get creative, and it works in many cases. Another example where you could use that is currencies. You could say check location, check currency, and then show the correct currency and the price point. And then I'm going to end on this one. As I said, you want to build something that's going to scale and that you don't have to update that often. So to build perennial solutions, there are some things you should think about. First of all, as you know, as engineers, you learned that already, you should define a workflow for engineering, but not just for engineering, for other teams that work with you. Do you want it to be waterfall? Typically, it's how it starts. It's not super organized, where things are going to trickle down in uncontrolled, piecemeal fashion, where you're going to have, okay, that part A needs to be completed before I can do part B, which can be a bit chaotic. Most of you are going to work, I think, in agile workflows where you have release sprints. So first you engage with stakeholders, you define, you commit. Once you commit, you cannot change anything that you agreed on, and then you deliver. And for some use cases, you could try and move towards continuous workflows. So it's typically much later when everything is super organized, and then the work can flow from one team to the next in a super controlled, organized fashion. Which you have some of that, like if you use GitHub, the way people have to review code one after the other, and then you can move on to the next part. There's some of that notion that exists there. Another one is not so much you as engineers, but your engineering project manager gather stakeholders. Spend a lot of time researching who the stakeholders are, gather all of them, assess the impact of a decision for everybody, so that you can finally commit to something that's going to stick. I think it's the main struggle of many projects, whether it's engineering or not, deciding on something, committing to it, and doing it. And to do it better over time, something I would recommend as well is assign competing goals to different teams. What I mean by that is typically when you start small, of course, it's going to be a small group of people who are going to do everything. That's normal. You don't have budget. But over time, it becomes dangerous because you're basically concentrating a lot of powers in the hands of sometimes just one person or a small group of people. And over time, it kind of becomes their baby, right? They don't want to change anything. So it doesn't help the product because you can have a lot of feelings that are created by concentration of powers. So to account for that, something that works is you could have one team focus on the vision. What is the vision of what we want to accomplish? Typically, they work closer to the product team. So in this case, it would be the owner of your awesome crêperie that wants to sell pancakes around the world. What's the vision that we want to accomplish? And that person needs to kind of understand how engineering works, but also how marketing works. That's one team. Team number two, I guess that's where most of you would end up working in the back end and front end development. All right, we have our vision. This is the engine we're going to build. And then team number three, how we're going to integrate that thing into our stack to deliver all assets. Of course, you need to have very close collaboration between all of them, but I would highly recommend that you separate so that you work towards something perennial. And with that, I am done. So we're going to move to some questions if we have time. Thank you, everybody.
All right, thank you for your conference, Aurélien. If you have any question, please ask them in the chat, or same as before, you can also ask them on Discord if you cannot think of any question right now. Well, it seems like your presentation was clear enough so that everyone could understand what you said.
Hey.
Well, if no one has any question, I think we can wrap this up. So thank you very much, Aurélien, for being here for us.
Thank you.
And have a good night.
Thanks. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right, everyone, this was the last conference for today. We have our last conference for this week tomorrow, for the last day of this English week. It will be a great conference for anyone who likes to develop using Python as a language. So please be here if you want to learn more about this language. And yeah, spend a good night and see you tomorrow.